Tonight, Jeannie Liggett is going to tell us a little bit about how you can fight the inverse relationship in the workplace. Anita's going to tell you a little bit more about her. Hi everyone. Jeannie is a government affairs manager for Exelon Generation. She has been in the political world for 10 years, beginning her career in the legislative office of Pennsylvania State Senator Connie Williams. Currently, Jeannie manages legislative issues in Pennsylvania and New Jersey for one of the largest competitive power generators in the U.S. Jeannie received a Bachelor of Science in Political Science from Texas A&M University Commerce and a Master of Arts in Political Science from Villanova University. We're very excited to have Jeannie back at Villanova today, so please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here tonight, and more importantly, thank you for hosting this Power of Women conference. Sorry, I'm getting a little warm up here, so I'm going to take my jacket off. I think it is very important as women that we empower each other and encourage and uplift each other, and I'll talk about it more in my remarks a little bit later, but I certainly appreciate what you guys are doing in the Women in Business organization and applaud you for having this conference. When I was asked to speak tonight, I absolutely jumped at the opportunity. I kind of have a 1-2 punch when it comes to being a woman in my profession. I work in a male-dominated industry. I work for a energy generation company. And not only just an energy generation company, we are the nation's largest nuclear power company. So you want to talk about being in a staff meeting where you are the only female, drive up the road to Limerick Generating Station and sit in on one of their staff meetings. Excuse me. And then what I do for that company is a predominantly male profession. I'm a lobbyist. And we all know the facts and figures about the number of women in Congress. It's about 20%. And what I do for the company is state lobbying. So I lobby in Harrisburg and Trenton, and the numbers there get even smaller as far as women in these elected roles. So I deal on a day-to-day basis with a number of men, day in and day out. And so, like I said, I jumped at the opportunity because, boy, do I have a story to tell when it comes to being a woman and climbing my way up the corporate ladder. And then I got an email that said, we want you to talk about success and likability and busting through that barrier. And I was like, I don't know if I can talk about that. That's a little out of my wheelhouse because I used to teach a class in political science, so I can talk about politics day in and day out. I can talk about what it's like being a woman in the political world. But when it comes to the correlation between success and likability and how it's positively correlated for men and negatively correlated for women, what could I possibly have to say about that? And throughout my career, I've had the great opportunity to work with a lot of interns, and one of the things that I encourage my interns to do is step a little outside of your comfort zone. So I decided to heed my own advice and step a little outside of my political world comfort zone and really focus on the correlation between success and likability and what it means to me and how I personally think I've burst through some of those barriers. And I think I also add not a unique perspective to this, but I am in my 30s, so I would consider myself on my way to the top. I am nowhere near where I want to be in my career, but I have come a long way from where I started. And I do remember the first time that I was in a conference room with the CEO of a company. I was hired about 7 years ago to work for a water wastewater utility company just up the road, Aqua America. And while it is a small company by corporate America standards, they're a pretty large company in what they do. And not only that, but the CEO of the company, Nick DeBenedictis, has a very strong foothold in the political world. And where my job became very important to the company was as a regulated utility, not just regulated by the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission or the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, but also things that the General Assembly itself does to either make our lives easier or harder. My role is very important in giving the CEO, or was very important in giving the CEO direction as to actions and opportunities he needed to take as a CEO. And so I remember probably about 2 or 3 weeks on the job, I was asked to sit in on in an executive council meeting with the CEO of the company, and lined on each side of the table, 5 gentlemen on each side who ran various parts of the business. It was a heavily dominated male business. And here I come, the only female in the room, and not only that, I was easily 20 years younger than every other male in the room. So needless to say, I was a bit intimidated. So I told myself going in, you know what, I'm going to go by the rules, speak when you are spoken to. I'm not going to interject my opinion. I'm just going to kind of take it all in and see where this goes. And at some point in the meeting, we were talking about loans for struggling wastewater utilities through this thing called PennVest, and we needed more funding in PennVest. And again, I wasn't too long on the job, but I had experience with the committee that this legislation needed to go through. And my predecessor, who I knew and loved and respected very much, had given the CEO some very bad information about how this piece of legislation could progress through the committee and make it to the floor for a vote. And I knew this. I knew this sitting in the meeting. I knew that when the CEO was talking about the prospects for this legislation and how gloom and doom they were, I knew he was wrong, but I didn't say anything. And so after the meeting, I let everyone else leave, and the CEO was still sitting at the conference table, and I was like, I'm sorry, do you have a minute? And I was like, sure, absolutely. And I said, listen, I hear what you're saying about the Democrats having control of the committee and not wanting to put any more money into PennVest, but I actually think we have an opportunity with some of these rural Democrats who sit on the committee. And then I made my case. I explained to him why I think we had a shot for getting this bill through the committee. And he looked at me and he said, you're absolutely right. You should have said something during the meeting. And I thought to myself, yeah, fair point. I was a little scared. And he said words to me next that just cut right through me. He said, Dave Wilson, my predecessor, would have said something during the meeting. And I thought, what was stopping me from saying something? I knew without a doubt that I was right. And it turned out I was. We were able to get the legislation passed. But there was something that was holding me back from raising my hand in that meeting and saying, I think you're wrong. Needless to say, I never made that mistake again. It was game on from that point on. So I'd like to start by talking about some of the roadblocks we face as women. We have a saying at Exelon. We're a large company. We're in 48 out of the 50 states, as well as the District of Columbia. Like I said, I have Pennsylvania and New Jersey. But we have a saying at the company that we can't get out of our own way. And basically what this means to us is, what works for one part of the company might be to the demise of the other part of the company, and it's really tough to come up with a compromise, so at the end of the day, nothing happens. And I think the same can be said sometimes for women in business. We can't get out of our own way. We hold ourselves back, whether it's because we lack self-confidence and we don't raise our hand when we know we're right, or we wait for opportunities and we don't apply for promotions because we think to ourselves, if I was really qualified for the promotion, or if they really wanted me for that opportunity, they would tell me that I'm qualified and that they want me for that. But that's not the case. Sometimes you do have to put yourself out there and take risks. And I noticed that just this week alone, I was at a 2-day staff retreat down in Virginia where we had all of the government and regulatory affairs professionals in one room for 2 days to talk about strategies for implementing legislation across the states that we do business in to, value our company. And I noticed that time after time, men were raising their hand and not afraid to give their opinions in front of this entire group of about 40 to 50 professionals as to how they thought that we could get legislation passed, or how we could change our messaging and rebrand our nuclear plants and whatnot, and not a single woman raised her hand during that 2-day conference. But last night, we had a big dinner. Before the dinner, we had a cocktail hour, and woman after woman went up to vice presidents and said, you know, we were talking earlier about this, well, here's my opinion. And I kept thinking, that's a really good opinion, you should have said something. And you know, at the end of the day, I was just as guilty of it as well. So on this topic of likability, does it matter? Yeah, it certainly matters if you're liked in your company. People don't want to work for or with unlikable people. That's kind of a no-brainer, right? If you put the qualifications of one boss and it's dishonesty, can't communicate, like not likable, and then you have another one who is honest, likable, and communicates, well, obviously you want to work for the latter and not the former. Also, tough decisions come easier from someone you like or trust. This is true when it's big corporate-wide decisions, or when they are smaller decisions dealing with personnel and things of that nature. And to that, I would say women who are more transparent with the direction they want to take their organizations, or where they want to go, are certainly perceived as more likable and trustworthy and honest. And then finally, unless you started your own company and you became CEO of that company, someone had to like you, right? Somebody had to like you to take a chance on you and hire you. So I would say it all started with at some point in your career being likable. But that said, we still have this perception out there that women in top corporate positions who are very successful are still perceived as unlikable. And to that, what I would say is, don't confuse the perception that women aren't liked with the reality that they are actually likable. And so what do I mean by that? Well, when dealing with other women in your profession, especially women in top-level positions, reserve judgment for yourself. Don't base your judgment of women in higher positions on what you've heard somebody say that they may or may not have heard from somebody else. We had a reorganization at Exelon a couple of years ago that impacted our government affairs department, and we found out that Delia Stroud was going to be our new vice president. And the only thing that we knew about Delia Stroud was that she was tough and that not very many people liked her. And so, as you can imagine, the anticipation for her arrival wasn't that great. We're not excited. We kind of had like the status quo, and now we were going to have this tough woman come and whip us into shape. And the truth of the matter is, she was tough. She was the toughest boss I ever worked for. But if you think about it, if your goal in your career is to get to the top, you want a boss who is going to be tough on you and expect the best out of you and make sure that you work hard and are accountable for your actions. And with regard to this notion that she wasn't well liked in the company, it was completely false. The people who didn't like her were the exact same people that she had passed time and time again on her way to the top. So easily, they were going to, the easiest thing to do is to talk bad about somebody who's beat you. So another thing I would suggest is something similar to what Adele was saying. It's empower other women. Empower women next to you, empower women above you, empower women who work for you or work at a lower level in your company. And don't fall victim to what we like to refer to as the only female in the room syndrome. I don't know if any of you have read Lean In or not, or if you're planning to read it over Christmas break, but One of the things that Sheryl Sandberg points out is that it's easy to hate women at the top because there are so few of them. And that's true. It's so easy to dislike something that may seem a little unattainable to you, and you can justify your feelings on that by not liking it. It's also easy to tell yourself that, well, okay, I work for a company of 1,000 people, there are only 20 female executives, it's probably not going to be me. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because every woman has the potential, as long as you are working hard and doing your job and doing it well. Everybody has the potential to work their way up to the top. But like I said, what we fall victim to so many times is the only female in the room syndrome. If I can somehow marginalize every other woman in the room, and take out my competition, so to speak, then it'll make it easier for me to make my way up to the top. But I can tell you, you don't make friends in business that way. And when you are seen as someone who embraces and empowers other women, you are seen as a good leader. And men and women alike take note of that, and you certainly move up in their book. Now, dealing with men in business can be a little trickier, because whether we like it or not, there are some archaic rules that we as women still have to follow. And when the study came out on the Howard versus Heidi in the Harvard Business Review, that basically, for those of you who aren't familiar with the case study, you have this woman, she's a venture capitalist, her name is Heidi. She worked really hard and worked her way to the top. And the study was that the person doing the study took two different groups and handed them the same case study on Heidi, but they only changed one thing. They changed the name. They changed Heidi to Howard. And everyone who participated in the case study agreed that both Heidi and Howard deserved to be where they were, but when it came to Howard, he was the kind of guy you wanted to be a buddy with and maybe go out for a drink after work. And Heidi was seen as maybe abrasive and manipulative. And that's the what I will call the archaic perception that we have to face when it comes to men in business. But I do want to echo something that Adele said, and that is think about the way other people are perceiving you. So much comes out of your attitude and the way you dress, more than I think we realize on a day-to-day basis. Think about the attention that you are getting from men in an office setting, in a corporate environment, and this does go to the way you dress. I'll just give you one piece of advice: less is more. You certainly don't want the kind of negative attention if you go with less is, or what was I saying? So the more you wear, less is more type thing. Anyway, moving on. You want to treat everyone with the same amount of respect, and that goes for men and women alike. You certainly, as a woman, do yourself no favors. You absolutely want to empower women and embrace their way to the top, but you don't want to do it at the expense of treating men with disrespect, because it takes diversity in a corporate environment, and we need men just as much as we need women in these environments. Dealing with yourself. Don't let others define you, especially if you don't agree with or like the definition that they're giving you. A little story about my background. I grew up in a very small town in rural East Texas, and I had a high school graduating class of roughly 100 students. I was everything that I could possibly sign up for. I was a cheerleader. I was National Honor Society. I was student council. I took all AP classes. My college standardized test scores were all above average. And I had just found out that I was either going to graduate third or fourth in my class. And I sat down with my guidance counselor, who was a female, and I wanted to talk about my options for college. And this is no exaggeration. I sat down with her and she handed me a pamphlet for cosmetology school. And not that there's anything wrong with that, if that's your dream and your hope and your desire. But one thing that I left out is I was also working part-time for the county attorney. And I thought it was common knowledge that I wanted to go to law school. And so I'm sitting there and she hands me this, like I said, brochure for cosmetology school, and she says, you know, you're outgoing and your hair is always pretty. I just thought this is something you would want to do. And I thanked her for taking such an interest in my hair and likability, and explained to her that I actually wanted to go to college to be a lawyer. And for multiple reasons, I went down a different career path, but the point here is she had and was trying to define me as one thing, and I had already defined myself as something else. And to that point, don't accept less than what you deserve, but make sure you have a strong case for getting what you deserve. Another quick story about one of my past struggles. About 2 years ago, Exelon merged with a company in Baltimore called Constellation. And we basically all had to reapply for our positions within the company, and I did. I reapplied for my position and re-interviewed for it and was told that I was going to get it. And when they gave me my offer, it was significantly less, not than I was making, but with the merger, I was going to take on a new state and new responsibilities. And I thought I deserved more. And essentially the more they gave me was what I thought a bit of a slap in the face. And my boss said, well, the good news is we're going to give you a retention agreement. So basically what that means is if I agreed to stay with the company for 2 more years, I would get X amount in the first year and X amount in the second year. And he thought that would make up the difference between what I thought I should be making and what the company was willing to pay me. And he said, don't worry about giving me an answer now. Think about it for a couple of days. And it's a good thing I didn't give him an answer then, because I probably would have just taken what the offer was. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought I deserve to be making what is not only in this retention agreement, because frankly it wasn't even to where I thought I should be, but if this company sees so much value in me, then they would straight out pay me what they think I'm worth, as opposed to making me stick around for 2 years before I get it. And so I walked back into my boss's office a couple days later and I said, I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to turn down the retention agreement. I think I deserve to be making X. I'll make my case to whoever I need to make it to. And he agreed with me, and he said, I'll do what I can to support your efforts. So I had to build my case. I had to not necessarily compare myself to others who were doing the same job and how they were doing it, but more on a parity of what were they making and what did I think I deserved to be making based on that. And I presented the case to our Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at Exelon, and it turns out he agreed with me. He thought that my case was strong and that I absolutely deserved to be making no retention agreement needed, the amount that I was asking for. Don't negatively compare yourself to other women sitting at the table. And this is kind of the opposite of being the only female in the room. This is, you might find yourself working on a project where you do have a couple of other women at the table with you. And maybe they bring a different perception than you've thought of, or or that you ever thought you could think of. And sometimes as women, we begin to think, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna discount myself because there's no way I'm that smart. Like I didn't bring that to the table. And the truth of the matter is, you were brought to the table for something. Somebody sees value in what you have to offer it, and chances are it's quite different than the perception of any other woman at the table. And there's no reason why you can't work as a team and see a project through successfully. And another point that I wanted to mention that Adele kind of touched on is finding a partner in life who supports what you're doing and where you're going, because it's just really important to have that support at home, and especially if it is going to require you and your partner to split responsibilities, share responsibilities. Maybe it's going to require you to make a little more money than him, and you just want to make sure that you've found someone in life who supports and empowers you in that way. And also, to Adele's point, she touched on a lot of things that I had wanted to touch on as well. Don't be afraid to use your contacts and connections and ask for help. I recently had a Villanova student reach out to me through LinkedIn, and he wanted to get involved in politics and had reached out to me to see where he could get started, and if there were any connections that I could make for him. And I absolutely helped him. I connected him with a couple of legislative offices that I knew were looking for openings. And I had met him for coffee in Bryn Mawr before. Obviously I wanted to meet him before I was putting his name out there. And when he was thanking me for helping him, he was like, why me? Why did you help me? And I said, you're the only person who's ever reached out to me to ask for help. And the fact of the matter is, I didn't get here because I didn't ask for help. As a matter of fact, that's how I got my first job out of graduate school. I sent a letter to our then state senator, Connie Williams, because I was hitting dead ends in my job search. And I was like, listen, I'm not asking you for a job, but I'm kind of asking you to help me network and help me get out there. And it turned out she was hiring, and I got a job. But use your contacts, use your connections. It's what a lot of us do. In conclusion, I would encourage all of you to set goals, and set 2 goals for yourself. Set a short-term goal, 1 year to 2 years, 18 months, whatever is a realistic time frame for you, and set some long-term goals for yourself. And don't stress about mapping out how you're going to get to the long-term goals, but make sure your short-term goals are going to get you to your long-term goals, and look for opportunities that accomplish these goals. For me, I knew I wanted to be a lobbyist. Halfway through my undergraduate, I had kind of grown away from this notion that I wanted to be an attorney, but I knew I wanted to work in government affairs or for a government agency. And after researching roles and responsibilities of roles, I decided that at some point in my life I wanted to be a lobbyist. And no one comes out, well, let me say this, very few people come out of undergrad or graduate school and get a job with a firm to be a lobbyist. You have to start somewhere, because one of the things that any good corporation or contract lobbying firm is looking for, it's your contacts and your networks. I mean, obviously they want you for your brains and what you can provide to the organization, but contacts and networks are very important in the lobbying world. And being from Texas, when I graduated from Villanova, I didn't have any of that here in Pennsylvania. And this definitely played out for me as I was interviewing for all these jobs and asked time and time again, well, what networks do you bring to the table? What kind of contacts do you bring to the table? And unfortunately, my answer at the time was none. And so, kind of at my wit's end, I had sent this email to the then state senator and had asked her to help me. And she had unbeknownst to me, I had no idea. She had 2 jobs open in her office. One was a constituent service rep that paid $30,000 a year, and the other was her director of legislative scheduling that paid $25,000 a year. And I knew as a constituent service rep that even though it was a whopping $5,000 a year more than the director of legislative scheduling, that wasn't going to get me to where I needed to be or put me on the track to being a lobbyist. So I took the job as her director of legislative scheduling, and what that allowed me to do was not only put together these legislative events that she would host in the district and in Harrisburg, but I got to staff these events with her, and I got to meet lobbyists who would attend these legislative events to either testify in committee hearings or just be in and around a state senator. And from that, I was able to develop a connection that put me in the role of a contract lobbyist for a lobbying firm. And while it was a startup lobbying firm, the gentleman had held a corporate lobbyist job at Merck and wanted to branch out on his own. And while, again, it wasn't necessarily paying me a whole lot of money, I knew it was a good step for me as far as getting experience as a lobbyist. And from there, I took the job at Aqua America. And one little bit of anecdotal information about that, I had actually I knew I was down to the final 2 at Aqua, and it was going to raise my salary significantly to work there, so obviously I really wanted the job. And I knew it was down to 2 people. It was down to me and a guy, and not just any guy, but the son of a state representative. So I got it in my head that I wasn't going to get the job because, you know, it's kind of a double whammy. Not only is it a guy that I'm going against, he's the son of a state representative. And I knew the guy, and I knew he was qualified for the job, but I also knew that he wasn't as qualified as I was for the job. And thankfully, the people who were doing the hiring at Aqua saw the same thing and hired me, which then took me to my job at Exelon, which is my current role now. So, I mean, that's all I really have for you. You know, be honest, be likable. Don't buy into the myth that women at the top are not likable and not willing to help. I mean, I will be honest with you here. A lot of women, especially in executive level positions, are asked day in and day out, will you be my mentor? And I know that's a topic for discussion in another session, but that doesn't mean they're not willing to help you or connect you with somebody who can help you. And I've always jumped at the opportunity to help interns and help women who are just starting in the political field. I mean, mostly because the people who ask me are so few and far in between that I certainly have time to help them. But I certainly would encourage you to raise your hand, ask for help, and go from there. So I think we have like a minute. I can take some questions. Well, I mean, certainly I can point to experiences in conference rooms where I certainly wish I would have said something or hesitated to say something, and then the guy next to me raised his hand and said the exact same thing. I certainly have had my fair share of Monday morning quarterbacks where I've worked on legislative projects that didn't go as I had planned, and I mean, the one thing I could say is I have learned from those experiences. As far as my education goes, I think my education did put me on track to where I wanted to be, and a lot of that was because I did set my 2-year and 5-year goals and made sure that, like I said, my 2-year goals were getting me to my 5+ year goals. Yes? Well, yes. As a lobbyist in Harrisburg, there is a perception amongst all women lobbyists that we are somehow doing something to undermine other lobbyists or that somehow we have worked on legislation and been successful in legislation through some kind of unethical means. But I mean, honestly, you're not going to be liked by everybody. None of us are. There are going to be people who have negative perceptions of you, and my advice is let it go. I mean, just let it go. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you again.